All right, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to install the 613 millimeter extrusion bars. And so they're going to have with the channel facing down, channel facing up on the bottom one. And so the top one, you're going to want to have the one that says MillRight. And so I know it's upside down right now, but we're going to flip that because when we put it on the machine, it will be facing the right way. So we're going to feed these into our V wheels. What we will have to do is make sure that they fit with not too much pressure. So right now it won't fit on either side. So I'm going to take my 10 millimeter wrench and adjust these until these go in and make good contact on the extrusion bar. So I'm gonna make that adjustment right now. And once you get them in, you can then make adjustments to make sure your wheels are turning. These two at the bottom are just spacers. You won't be adjusting those. You'll just be adjusting these here. But you can tell that that's moving pretty easily and it's making good contact because both of my wheels are turning. So I'm gonna do the same thing with this one. Then if you flip it around and look at the front, you'll notice that the MillRight sticker is the right side up. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is attach the idler slide Y gantry plate. And we're going to be putting this on, if you have your machine or this part, your router mount facing this way towards you, this is going to go on the right side over by the label. So we're going to mount those. It's going to go just like that with 4 of our self-tapping screws. So we're going to get those put in now. All right, next thing we're going to do is loosen the set screw on this bearing. And we are going to feed our 600 millimeter lead screw. And we're going to feed that through the back. And it's going to go right through here through the backlash nut. We're going to feed that through over to this bearing there. So first thing, it says to loosen the set screw. And it says a 2.5 millimeter, but that is way too big. It is a 1.5. All right, and then we're going to feed, flip it around this way so you can see. We're going to feed our lead screw through there. And you just have to twist it to get it to go through. We're going to thread that all the way until it is touching our bearing. All right, and once you have it over here, you can just move this, but it did say to have a little bit sticking out over here. I think you can see it maybe there. We're going to have just a little bit sticking out, and we're going to leave it there. We're probably about an inch or so sticking out. All right, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and install this plate to the right side. And so it's going to go in those holes there, which will match up right there. We're going to use the number 10x1 self-drilling screws, lubricate those, and get those mounted. It will end up looking something like that. All right, the next thing we're going to do now that that plate is attached is we're going to turn our lead screw until we get into the coupler. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure that that coupler is open all the way so it'll fit. Okay, we're going to thread that in. I'm going to hold on to that coupler and keep threading that until it bottoms out. And then you can feel it's not turning anymore. And then you're going to go ahead and tighten that coupler with the number 2 Allen wrench. Once you have that, you'll also notice that your lead screw is no longer sticking out on this side either. It is now recessed in. So we're going to go ahead and tighten the screws for the bearing housing on this side. And that'll be with a 1.5 Allen wrench. All right, once you have the collar on that bearing tightened up, next thing we're going to do is going to mount this to the base. So we'll bring it back over. Okay, so we have the base. Next thing we're going to do is place the top portion on top. The base, the way I have it facing, is the holes in the back. That's the bracket for the motors. Those are going to be facing away from us. And we're going to set these on here. And so I want to make sure that your wheels are touching. So what we will do is on the underneath side, there are brackets, or there are holes for us to attach 2 more of the V wheels here, and then 2 more on this side as well. All right, here is where we're gonna be installing our V wheels. All right, so I had to change things up a little bit from the install. I could not get the other side of the V wheels on with it connected like this. So what I did, I loosened up all of the top V wheels, took this off. I jacked up the frame here to have the same width, and I actually took off this piece of the frame on the back side here. So I could slide on the V wheels and have it go on this way, and then I'll tighten these up. So right now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put this frame back on, snug everything back up to make sure everything is aligned, and then I will go back to tightening up these V wheels on the bottom and on the top. All right, I have these adjusted where it is moving pretty smoothly back and forth. One tip on the spacers, there is a notch in the part of the spacer, and if you turn that up, that gives you the most distance in between the wheels, and then you can kind of tighten it from there with your 10mm wrench. All right, I have turned the machine around so you can see what we're gonna do next. Next, we're gonna put in the corner brackets. They look different in this package than what they do in the picture. You'll notice one side is ground off, and then one side has little ridges to be able to go into the rail. So it's gonna go right here. And to attach them, what you're going to do is you're gonna take one of the M5 by 18 machine screws and a lock washer, and you're gonna put the bracket in. You're gonna come through with that with the lock washer. You're then gonna put a flat washer on it, and then one of the M5 nuts. And we're gonna do the same thing on the other side. All right, next thing you're gonna do is you're gonna have a long wire motor and a short wire motor, and you're gonna have 2 of the brackets and 2 of the couplers, and we're gonna go ahead and put the couplers on the motor to get those ready to install. So you're gonna use this as your spacer for the install, so push it all the way up against the shaft of the motor. Slide your coupler down with the little hole going down on the shaft of the motor. And once you have that placed correctly, go ahead and tighten it with a 2mm Allen wrench. Plug that up, and then you can take your spacer off, and then you're gonna do the same thing on the short wire motor. Coupler there, smaller hole on the bottom. Use that for your spacer, and then tighten it. All right, I have turned the machine around, so this is the front. Your long wire motor is gonna go on the right-hand side, so that's the side that has the emblem on it. And so what you're going to do is you'll put your motor through with the spacer. You're going to be attaching the motors with the M320 machine screws. There's 6 of them in the bag, and you're gonna use 3 on each motor. When you position the motor, you are wanting to line your bracket up, so all 3 holes line up there, and your wire is going to go in angling towards the middle of the machine. I like to just get them started so I can get everything lined up, and just going to snug them up a little bit because we may have to adjust it as we thread our lead screw in. There's a little bit of play in these motors. All right, so same thing for the left side. The left side is gonna be the short wire motor. Again, the way you're putting it in is gonna be with the motor on an angle, and I'll turn it around and show you, but the wire again is gonna be hanging and going towards the middle of the machine. Again, just gonna snug those up for now. Turn it around so you can see the wires the motor are angling over, and the wire would be angling towards the middle of the machine on both sides. They'll be identical. All right, I've got the machine turned sideways here because the next thing we're gonna do is put our 600mm rod through, and we're going to load it here. And all the instructions, they show this closer to this side here, so we're just gonna take it, and then we will be threading it through our anti-kickback. So we're just gonna thread this through and then do the same thing on the other side as well. All right, and that's as far as I threaded those through, because I don't wanna have to thread that the whole way. I'm just gonna slide this back and we're gonna get it lined up and pushed into our coupler all the way. We make sure we wanna turn this until that coupler is turning and do the same thing on the other side to make sure that we are in as far as it will go. And again, we left these a little bit loose, and if you need to, you can loosen them up a little bit more to give yourself some play. Make sure that they line up properly. All right, as soon as I turn that, can't turn it anymore. Same thing with this one. As soon as I turn this, the coupler is turning. I'm gonna just hold that and make sure I can't go any further. And I cannot. So next thing I'm gonna do, and you'll notice you'll have a little bit sticking out. Next thing you're gonna do is gonna go ahead and tighten up your couplers on both sides with your 2mm Allen wrench. Now we're also gonna wanna go ahead and fully tighten all of the motor screws as well. All right, next thing you're gonna do is you're gonna get your pillow block bearings, and it's gonna go over your thread screw. You'll slide those on, and you're gonna attach them with a M516 button cap screw that uses a 3mm Allen wrench. So we'll get those put on this side and then do the same on the other as well. All right, next thing you're gonna do is I've turned the machine around, and you're gonna put in 2 of the drop-in T-nuts, which they look just like that. And you're gonna put those in the top rail here. Just put it in an angle and then push, and then they snap in. And what we'll be doing is we're gonna use this angle bracket, and we're gonna connect these. This is the drop chain angle bracket, just labeled angle bracket on the equipment, and then we're gonna attach that because we're gonna be attaching the angle bracket with 2 M5x8 button cap screws and split lock washers. The little angle or the ledge is gonna go up. There's only one way really to install this. So we're gonna see if we can get one started, and then we'll line up the hole on our others. And I'm just gonna snug those down. And I'm gonna pull this bracket all the way up to the top to snug it down until I know exactly where I need that to be. When you do your corner bracket, it's not very clear in the directions, but you are going to put in one of the drop-in T-nuts. You're gonna put that in the side piece, and then there'll be another screw that you will use to attach your corner bracket. And you'll do that to the other side as well. All right, next thing you're gonna do is you're gonna take the drag chain, another bracket. It's gonna look like this. It's gonna go on top of here with an M4x12 machine screw and then an M4 lock washer. And you're gonna have it sticking straight out, just like this. For your next step, you'd be ready to go ahead and start with your wire management with your wire tracks. But if you have the homing switches, we need to go ahead and install those first. So if you open up that homing switch package, you're gonna have 3 switches, and they are notated by the lengths of their wire. You have your short roller Y switch, you have your long roller X switch, and then you have your push button Z switch, and then all of your brackets and mounting hardware that you'll need. So we're gonna work on getting our homing switches hooked up. First homing switch you're gonna install is the push button switch. It's gonna go in the hole that is right here. I've turned this machine around, so this is the front. It's gonna go right here in this hole. So first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna take the little nut off. And then there's also a lock washer. The instructions say that that lock washer can be discarded. You're not gonna need it. So you're gonna take this, you're gonna put it through here. This again would have been a good example or a good reason to leave some more play in this So this was further down because it's going to be a little bit more challenging to get that threaded on. So I'm going to get this in and threaded on. It's a tight fit right now, so I'm going to work on getting that fitted to get the threads all the way down, and then I will put the nut on. In the instructions, it recommends using a pair of needle nose to help thread your nut on. So, all right, I did get the homing switch in. One thing I had to do is I had to get a drill bit and clean out the extra paint that is in there to get that to fit loosely. Otherwise, it was really too hard to push in. I was worried it was going to hurt the threads. And then you do have to get a pair of needle nose. I'd recommend a small pair of needle nose to be able to tighten that up. And you just snug it down the best that you can. And we're ready for the next homing switch. Next thing you're going to do is open up your hardware package, and you're going to get out your brackets that are going to go with the homing switches, and then the nuts and screws that are the smallest ones. And they're called the M3 by 16 machine screws, and then the M3 lock nuts. It's the only one that there's 4 of. They are the smallest ones that are in there. For the nut size, you're going to need a 7/32 socket or wrench, and then a Phillips head screwdriver. And both homing switches are going to get mounted the same. And so what those are going to look like is you're going to have your L bracket part faced down, and then your switch is going to go just like this. So you have your bracket there, and you have your switch that will go like that. We have both homing switches that have been mounted to the bracket. One thing I would caution is just be careful how tight you tighten that because you are going plastic to metal and you don't want to crack the plastic housing. So once we have those, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take off, I've turned the machine around again, so at the back of where the router is being held, the anti-backlash bracket here, we're going to take out that top screw, and we're going to put in, it's the only bolt in the package that comes with it, and then one of the large spacers. So there's 2 of the large spacers and one really small one. In the instructions, it talks about using 2 of the spacers, but they replaced those 2 smaller ones with larger ones. So we're going to slip that in, going to get that started there, and we're going to tighten it up. Next thing you'll do is you'll remove this screw from the left bracket. So this is the back of the machine. If you're looking at the machine with the MillRight logo located on the right-hand side of the top extrusion, this is going to be the back left corner. We're going to remove this screw here in our bracket, in our corner bracket, and we're going to replace it with the long machine screw. And then we're going to put on our homing switch. This is the short wire homing switch, and then our spacer. So I'll show you how that's going to go on. All right, how we have this is we have our screw, our L bracket, and then our spacer. And we're going to install this, and we're going to put this in the hole that we just took that screw from, and we're going to put it on an angle. So when we do screw it in, this will engage when it hits the extrusion bar there. So I'm going to go ahead and get this screwed in and mounted. Once you have that installed, it should look something like this on the angle. I also added a washer. It was actually the lock washer that we discarded from the switch on top of the router mount. It was just too loose and I needed something to hold in tighter, so I used that lock washer there. Next thing we'll be doing is mounting our last homing switch to our bottom extrusion rail in the back. You're going to put in your drop-in T-mount, get that in, and then you're going to use your machine screw that comes with it, the last spacer, which is the small one, a lock nut, and then we're going to mount it. This is not where this is going to go. I'm just going to use this so I know the height, because that's what's going to engage it. And then we're going to slide it on down to the end of the rail. All right, and you can see that here it's going to hit. If this was to move, it goes the screw, lock washer, L bracket, and then spacer into your T-slot. And then now what we're going to do is we're going to slide this. I've got this mounted just on the other side of this bracket. Really going to have to see how far over our router will come and then how far back to make sure that we have the correct adjustments once we have the motors up and going. Now we are ready to work on our cable management with our drag chains. So our drag chains, the first one is gonna fit here and gonna go on this little angled shelf or angled bracket here, and then it's gonna connect to this. And the wires that we're gonna run that is gonna be to our motor and then our homing switch if you have one. You can try to feed those wires all the way through, but they will get caught. So the easiest thing to do is pop off these little guards. You can use needle nose pliers or your fingers if they will fit in. And then that way you can lay and move your wires down. So I'm gonna pop some of these off so we can get our wires in them. Next step, we know that it's going to be mounted like this. So we're going to run our wires in with our drag chain laying down flat like this. Once you have your wires in, you can go ahead and reattach the little plastic pieces on your drag chain. Next thing we're gonna do, we're gonna mount our drag chain to our drag chain bracket. You're gonna use your M3x8 machine screws and your M3 lock nut washers. Your screw is gonna come up through the bottom of your drag chain and then through the bracket. And then you will put your nut on top here. Next step is we're gonna attach our drag chain to our bracket here. I have moved this bracket down until it's about 2 inches off of the side plate where the motor is mounted, and that should give us enough travel. When we do turn it on, we'll make sure that we don't need to slide this bracket over more to give it plenty of room to travel back and forth. Same thing, we're gonna use our M3x8 machine screws to get this attached. On this one, we're gonna run our screws down from the top and have our nut underneath. And there is room, there's a slot where it gives you some room to play, so I would make sure that your drag chain is off of the extrusion rail. I've turned the machine sideways so you can see the gantry plate with the motor on it. And the next thing we're gonna do is install our drag chain bracket with an M4x12 machine screw with a split washer or a lock nut washer. So we're gonna get this installed. When you install this, you're gonna have the rounded portion on top with the slit. Underneath is the flat portion because that's where another drag chain is going to mount. We're going to install our last drag chain. Same thing, and take these clips off. And honestly, the more you take off, the easier it is. Yes, you have to snack them back on, but it's a lot easier than trying to feed the wire through. The wires that we're gonna be working on, so our power box is gonna be mounted here somewhere at the back, and we're gonna be mounting this to a board. So the wires that we have to worry about movement with and putting in the drag chain are gonna be the motor here, the homing switch that is located on our Z-axis, and then our homing switch that is mounted up on top, which would be here, and then our motor that is mounted on top of our router as well. Those are the wires that we are going to be putting inside of our next drag chain. All right, when I open up these actually stayed on. They do just kind of swivel around and hinge out. So the way this is gonna be installed, we wanna be thinking about, it's gonna be attached here, and then you have to think about, it's gonna be rolling this way and then back as the axis travels down. And so this is the way that we're gonna be putting it in. So I'm gonna just flip it over and I'm gonna install all of those wires this way. All right, I have my drag chain mounted, or drag chain ready to be mounted here. To attach it to the bracket, we're gonna use 2 of the M3x16 machine screws and then the M3 lock nuts on top. So you'll feed the screws up through it, and then your nut will be on top of the bracket here to tighten down. Next thing we are ready for is to look at kind of where we want to place our CNC. So I have cut a 32x30 piece of plywood, and I really just went with that size because it's the size of my table that I already had that I'm going to use. But I also wanted to make sure that I had at least enough room to fit my controller box next to it, because that's where all of our cables are going to be hooked up to. So with this drag chain, they have some screw holes. They also have a little adhesive plate that you can put down and zip tie it to. I'm gonna leave this unhooked for right now because I need to make sure that this can travel back and forth without causing any tension on my drag chain. So I'm gonna leave this loose for right now. My other motors, you have your wire to be hooked up here, so I'm gonna bring this around. I'll probably just end up kind of coiling this wire up with a twisty tie or something else. I'll show that later. And then hooking it up, you also have your homing switch. We're gonna come around with it. And then you have your wire here in the back from your other motor that you'll need to hook up as well. One thing I'm gonna do for this back motor here is with this long cord is I'm gonna use a piece of 3/8 inch PEX. And I'm going to feed this through here just so it's a little bit more protected and the wire's not exposed. Pull that through and we're just gonna mount it here on the back. So here is this piece of PEX with the wire to this motor coming through. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use some plastic brackets to go over and hold this down. I don't have any of those right now, but that will be my plan to keep this wire from being exposed, and it has plenty to be able to come around and hook to our power box. So we're gonna go ahead and hook up our motors and our probes to our control box. So one thing it does say is it wants the blue wires on the motor hookups to be facing to the MillRight logo. So as you're putting those up, the blue wires are going to go closest to the MillRight logo. So first one I'm going to hook up is the Z. The homing switches can be hooked up any way. It does not matter which way those go, so we're going to get those hooked up as well, and we'll plug everything in. Your Y, it's Y1 and Y2. Those are the motors that are in the back. It doesn't matter which one's Y1 and which one's Y2. This is what it will look like when all of the motors and homing switches are hooked up. The label on the homing switch where they goes actually says lim, like the limiter, L-I-M, and those where those will go. Now we're gonna work on getting these wires zip tied or twisty tied together so it's not quite all over the place. This still isn't attached yet. I'm gonna wait until I move these motors to see how much play I need and where I need to mount this. In the directions, this actually shows this part facing the other way. However, there's not enough slack or not enough space in my wires to be able to do that, so I'm gonna mount it this way. All right, we'll get our power supply plugged in and our USB cable plugged into our box as well. Okay, I have everything hooked up. I actually brought my computer out to go ahead and test and see if I have these angled the right way, basically, for my spacing, to make sure that my brackets aren't gonna hit before they hit the homing switches or those limiter switches. So we're gonna go ahead and make some adjustments and see. On the Z axis, it's pretty easy to tell that it's gonna hit that without interfering anything. So I'm really gonna be checking the X and Y axis. So that homing switch engaged with the Y axis, and I have this much space right here. So that's as far as it's gonna let it go. And I'm gonna leave that to be just like that. I don't want that to go any further. So next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna test my X axis. Okay, so that engaged a little bit too soon. So I'm gonna move this homing switch over to let this travel a little bit further. All right, so here you can see the gap that I have. I really am not comfortable with that going over any further. So we're gonna stick with that right there. And I'm gonna turn this over to where it would hit and engage our trigger. All right, one thing to caution with these, whenever I had this moved over further, this homing switch actually ran into this one. So what I had to do is go back and fine tune it to make sure that there wasn't any interference before this hit. There is some room of clearance there. It will go ahead and engage this homing switch before it goes back any further. This one comes over, hits this. It leaves a little bit more of a gap there, but not much. Definitely what I can work with. We're gonna go ahead and get the router installed. So I have the Makita router. I've taken the base plate of it off. The way you're gonna have to install it is going to be facing this way with the logo out. Gonna be facing this way with the logo out and the cord facing forward. So we're gonna go ahead and slide that in and see what we need to loosen up to get it to fit. Looks like you'll need to loosen this. It is a little stiff going in. So for height-wise, it doesn't really tell you how high to mount it, you just kind of have to go by the picture. So I think I'm gonna go with somewhere here kind of in the middle and see how that goes, and then we can always raise it and lower it. You have your screws to tighten the clamp down here. You won't need the 2 screws that are in the middle. You can take those parts or those screws out, or if you want to leave those in, you can. You just won't be using them. Here's where I ended up mounting the drag chain. I got it screwed down here. Used a couple of the little plastic pieces for the cable management just to get these tight together, and then zip tied those together. In the back of the CNC machine, here are the brackets that I use to hold down the pecs to make that secure. That way that cable is in there and is protected and can't fall or get bumped off the table. All right, we have everything zeroed. We're gonna run our first test cut. We have our X, Y, and Z axis zeroed. We have our piece of stock anchored securely down with the clamps that it came with. We're gonna turn on our router. I have it set on setting 3. It recommended 18,000 RPMs for the bit that it came with. Setting 3 is about 17,000 RPMs, so we're gonna give this a shot and see how it does. There's our first sign with our MillRight Carve King 2 CNC machine.